There are days that begin with a cold cup of coffee and a single message capable of wiping out the trust you have built over years. That morning. The message arrived while I was fine-tuning slides for the quarter's final pitch, a presentation I had spent a whole month preparing, staying up late many nights to piece together every insight and every line of the campaign titled The Last Honest Brand. When my phone rang, I didn't think much, just instinctively picked it up, but one brief sentence froze me. We've decided to take a different direction. Thank you for your early contributions. The message came from Darlene, the creative director at Reverie, where I had worked for nearly 4 years. Reverie was a boutique agency specializing in emotional marketing, renowned for its humane campaigns that touched viewers' hearts, ironically. The very place that crafted messages about lasting relationships was breaking what I believed was sincerity. My name is Tessa Brooks, once called the emotional brain of Reverie, not because I knew how to cry on cue or tell tear-jerking stories, but because I had the ability to see things no one had named yet hidden desires, wounds people dared not face. I wove those truths into campaigns for clients, from cosmetic brands to educational foundations for children, to rebranding projects for tech companies. I helped transform dry messages into stories that made people pause. I loved this work not just for creativity, but because I believed emotions were the one thing that couldn't be copied. That belief drove me to endure crushing deadlines and swallow my tears each time Lorraine, the team lead, crushed my efforts with excuses like, forgot to credit you, haven't updated yet, or you probably don't remember I rewrote that part from scratch. I knew Lorraine didn't like me. From my first day at the company, she looked at me with scrutiny, like someone who had settled in, but feared a newcomer might shake her place. I kept my head down, avoided conflict, thinking that if I just did well, the results would speak. But I was wrong. In an environment where credit was everything, the name on the work was the winner, and those with close ties to Darlene like Lorraine always had the final say. I didn't fully grasp this until the Last Honest Brand campaign got the green light. That project was my initiative, where I researched Gen Z psychology, built the script structure, and even crafted the first visual concept. Yet, just before final approval, I was pulled from the team for the reason vision no longer aligned. I remember that afternoon after Darlene's message. I walked into the meeting room still hoping things could be salvaged, but when I pushed open the door, there was Lorraine presenting. Every slide detail matched what I had written. The hook, the emotional model, the storytelling rhythm down to the last period was the same. She called it a group idea. Darlene smiled and nodded, but never once looked at me. I don't clearly remember how I left, only that as I reached the elevator, my hands shook so badly I dropped my keys. Victor, my closest colleague, picked them up quietly and said, I know it's yours, but they don't want the truth. They want the story that's easier to accept. I said nothing, just nodded. I took 3 days off immediately. Back at my small apartment on the outskirts of Charlotte, I lay there refusing to eat, read emails, or answer calls. The feeling of betrayal didn't hit like a punch, but like cold water layers being poured on my face in winter, gradually colder, deeper, soaking in. The pain wasn't from losing a campaign, but from the truth that the trust I put in others became a weapon turned against me. I used to think doing well meant recognition, but it turned out effort wasn't measured by hard work, but by where you stood, who you knew, and how well you could retell someone else's story as your own. I reread old chats with Darlene, where she once called me a rare one who keeps their heart in this industry. I thought about Lorraine, who once asked me to help smooth the presentation flow, then copied everything without a single note. I thought about Victor, who saw but chose silence. I thought about Rosa, the office cleaner who came twice a week and told me, "You're good. I hope you never lose that kindness." And then I laughed. Kindness is the thing people most easily trample on in a place where everyone fights for the mic. On Wednesday morning, I woke at 5:30 with sunlight slipping through thin curtains, shining on the cold coffee left from the day before. I sat up straight, opened my laptop, logged out of the company email, and wrote my resignation letter. No complaints, no explanations. Just one line: I withdraw, wishing everyone success. Then I sat quietly, staring at the distant building where I once dreamed I'd have my own office. That dream was dead. But something else, something new, was awakening inside me. There are mornings that do not begin with an alarm clock, but with a familiar silence so cold it chills you to the bone. I woke early, no longer because of work, but because my body had grown used to facing pressure the moment I opened my eyes. Yet this time, there were no meetings scheduled, no deadlines looming, no calls reminding me to prioritize the VIP client campaign. Only the quiet hum of the fan in my small apartment and the faint light slipping through thin curtains, shining on the cold coffee cup I still hadn't let go of as a habit. The silence no longer felt as frightening as those first 3 days after leaving my old company. It became a beginning, a path I did not yet know where it would lead me. But at least it was not back to the place that had made me doubt my own true worth. I started those mornings by reopening old files, ideas once discarded as not marketable, proposals I had written overnight but never had the chance to present. Not because I wanted to relive the past, but because I needed to prove to myself that my efforts had never been wasted. I needed to remember why I started this work, not for recognition, but to tell stories that mattered. And from there, an idea slowly took shape. One late afternoon, I called Carter, an old friend who once worked as a content producer in Portland. We were never close, but stayed in touch enough that I didn't hesitate to reach out. I asked him directly if I wanted to start a platform sharing short-form video campaigns, not aiming for cheap viral hits, but focusing on depth real stories. Honest brands, would anyone care? Carter paused a moment before answering. If someone like me told those stories, he'd be the first to watch. That didn't stir me like a film score would, but it planted something firm enough to keep me at my desk that night. I opened a new file and named it Echo, not for sound, but because I wanted all content from here to leave a true resonance. No frills, no preaching, just what was real, touching, and true. But starting a venture wasn't fueled by passion alone. I had no capital, no team, no technical foundation. What I had were storytelling skills, an ability to sense emotional needs in the market, and some old contacts I'd never dared ask for help. I began sending emails, not begging, but proposing collaboration. Exchanging value, I would create free content for them. They would share the videos on their platforms, a mutual experiment. 30 emails brought no replies. 10 calls were politely declined. But on the 31st email, a small coffee shop in Austin responded. They agreed to let me make an introductory video if I could shoot and edit it myself. I didn't have a fancy camera or a production crew, just an iPhone and basic editing software. But I had turned scattered voice memos into million-view campaigns before, so I knew that with the story real enough. Equipment was no barrier. I flew to Austin using my remaining savings, stayed at the cheapest homestay I could find, and spent 2 days living with the shop staff, listening to regular customers, capturing small moments like the owner wiping an old wooden table or a student employee greeting customers by name. I edited the video overnight without sleep, layering the owner's narration with her trembling voice. No sad soundtrack, just the authentic sounds of the environment. When I posted the video, I didn't boost it with ads. I just sent it back to the shop and told them to use it if they thought it deserved it. 3 days later, they called, their voice choking with emotion because the video had been shared over 10,000 times and sales had surged within a week. I said nothing to anyone, shared nothing online, but I began writing the real plan for Echo, a platform to share honest brands through deep and authentic storytelling, not reality TV style, but like a whisper over a late afternoon coffee. I knew it wouldn't be easy. No one cared for truth in a world addicted to drama, but I didn't need millions of views. I only needed the right eyes to see, one by one, from small customers to medium brands, to those underestimated and discarded by old companies for being not marketable. I wanted to create a place where they didn't have to shout to be believed. I wanted revenge through success, but not success to boast success, so I would never have to bow again. The challenge came not only from starting, but from skeptical glances. Some people I knew in media began sending messages like I heard Tessa switch to freelancing. I think you should join an agency with a foundation. Starting a business now is risky. I didn't blame them. I had said those things to others once too. But I was no longer sitting behind a conference table listening to someone define true value by follower count. I had lost faith once, and this time I would rebuild it myself without anyone's approval. In the first month, I had only 3 videos. By the second month, 2 more brands agreed to collaborate. I stayed up nights editing videos, shooting by day, with no team except myself and a few freelancers hired per small project. Some nights I edited until dawn, eyes stinging but heart light. Some videos got only a few hundred views, but a message from a stranger made me cry. I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. Now, I'm not. That was the first time I realized I was not just starting a business, I was being reborn, and that was truly the first step of a remarkable comeback. There are signs of an undercurrent no one notices until it bursts the banks. I realized this on an early autumn morning when a message arrived from an unknown account. Have you seen the Echo video for the old bookstore? It's very much like how you used to handle concepts at Reverie. I opened the attached link. A feature about the video I had made for an independent bookstore in Nashville. The narration, pacing, colors, and emotional guidance reminded viewers of an old Reverie campaign, but not Lorraine's version mine. From the time before, I was cut from the team. The sender was a former intern who worked with me and now contributed content for an industry news site. She knew how to tell stories, but also how to read between the lines. And this time, between the lines was a slowly unfolding covert battle. Since I left Reverie, the company kept running, but I didn't pay much attention. I thought I had closed that door and locked it. But the clip I received showed Lorraine refining old campaigns by reusing the frameworks I had written, renaming them, changing the surface, then packaging them as new products. This was not unusual in the industry, but when brands began to notice overlaps between campaigns, especially when people compared Reverie's storytelling to Echo. The issue was no longer clever creativity, but subtle plagiarism. The second message came from Carter, now an assistant producer at a large social content platform, Tessa. Reverie invited us to partner. Strangely, they suggested a new series using the exact format of the video you sent me last week. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from knowing Lorraine never gave up her habit of taking everything without asking. The difference now was I was no longer in the meeting room to stay silent. I began organizing everything, not by accusations or hostile statements, but by data. I reviewed all old work emails, saved every original file, restored drafts from an external hard drive, and compared every piece of content with Reverie's latest campaigns. Some parts matched word for word, differing only in font. Some concepts I had handwritten were now copied in Lorraine's writing style, only with a different narrative voice. I didn't know whether to feel hurt or amused, but I knew this time I could not let it slide. I prepared a detailed dossier, not to sue, but to send to the right people brands who had worked with me, those familiar with Echo, and former colleagues who had seen but never spoke out. I didn't embellish. I attached only facts. A week later, I was invited to a branding creativity seminar in Dallas, not as a keynote speaker, but representing young startup content creators. Part of the program was a discussion on true value and transparency in emotional marketing. I didn't expect to speak, but when the moderator asked who had felt their voice stolen in a creative environment, I raised my hand. The room fell silent as I shared about a campaign bearing another name, credited to someone else, but written in my small kitchen at 3 a.m. I didn't name names, but everyone in the industry was smart enough to understand. 3 days later, Reverie issued a press release admitting some content was unintentionally reused from drafts without proper attribution. Darlene spoke on behalf of the company. Lorraine stayed silent, but clients began pulling contracts. A sustainable fashion brand announced a pause on its campaign, citing internal ethical reasons. I got a message from Victor, this time brief, just 4 words: she's been exposed. I didn't reply, nor did I feel victorious, but I knew what was taken from me, the chance to tell my own story, was now returning in the fairest way, not by accusations, but by consequences impossible to hide. Lorraine started posting victim-themed statuses on social media, hinting at sabotage, envy, and false accusations, but those close enough to know no longer believed her. One was Rosa, the old company cleaner now working part-time at the first coffee shop I had filmed for. She sent me a small note. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. The real ones don't fear time." I folded the paper and put it in my wallet beside a nearly empty bank card, but filled with hope. I knew I wasn't successful yet, but I no longer feared failure. That afternoon, as I was editing a new clip for a nonprofit educational organization, an email came from an investor. They wanted to meet about the possibility of developing Echo into a platform supporting independent media startups, focusing on those previously excluded for not being sharp enough, not trendy enough, or simply for choosing to tell the truth instead of exaggerating. I read that email again and again, not because I was moved, but because I knew the moment I once dreamed of, once thought impossible, was gradually becoming real. I thought of the early days sitting in my dark apartment, replaying old audio clips to hear how shaky my voice had been. Now, it no longer trembled. There is a strange moment between chaos and calm, where everything around spins wildly, but inside you stand still, reaching a deeper clarity. I sat in my new office, which was really just a small corner on the 3rd floor of an old building in Midtown, where the sound of buses echoed louder than phone rings. The walls were painted a warm gray, a wooden desk worn at the edges, a chair that was not very comfortable, and a desk lamp with soft yellow light. There was no sparkling logo, no soundproof meeting room, but I knew this was the true starting point. After nearly 8 months struggling between freedom and uncertainty, Echo finally had its own name on a door. I had just signed a 6-month strategic content consulting contract with a nonprofit focused on community education, where they believed truth and emotion must go together to change behavior. They came to me not for follower counts, but because they had watched all my videos, read every description, and saw the spirit of lasting connection, what I called marketing with emotion, and they called building sustainable trust. The first meeting ended with a firm handshake and words I would not forget, Tessa. Don't make content for us. Make content with us. I smiled. For the first time in months, not out of politeness. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and typed the first words of a document titled Echo 2, Zero, not just a brand storytelling platform, but a small ecosystem connecting those once rejected from the big stage, those once deemed not fast enough, not trendy enough, but still telling their stories slowly and deeply. I called it the Reclaim Project, reclaiming the right to name oneself, reclaiming a voice once stolen, and doing it without shouting. At the same time, an article on a media specialist site stirred the creative community. Reverie was officially accused of plagiarizing 3 recent campaigns, with leaked internal documents showing Lorraine directly revising old proposals that were rejected last year. I was not mentioned in the article, but readers were smart enough to connect the dots. Comments split in 2 half defending, half disappointed. What mattered to me was not who was right or wrong, but how people began speaking of true value as something that cannot be faked long term. A week later, Lorraine locked all her personal accounts and announced she was taking a break from social media. Darlene was silent, but a close insider messaged me they were having internal meetings to reassess leadership roles and looking for a more humane direction for the company. I just nodded. No comment. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like an outsider. The turning point came when I was invited to speak at a regional media event, with the theme telling stories to heal. At first, I intended to decline, thinking I was not big enough to represent anything. But then I remembered the first day I stood outside that meeting room, back against the door, hands trembling after being pulled from my own project. I remembered the nameless emails, the twisted proposals. I remembered feeling betrayed not once, but by 1,000 small cuts over time. And I thought, if I had survived all that, at least I could stand tall and tell it once more, not to accuse, but to tell those midway through their journey that there is a way out, even when others try to blur the path. The talk took place in a small auditorium with over 100 attendees, mostly young creatives, some from my old agency, a few faces I had met in Reverie's hallways. I didn't bring slides. I simply stood on stage, the lights modest, and spoke about the journey to reclaim my voice after it had been taken. I spoke about once thinking I wasn't good enough, wanting to erase all old traces, but how those very things seen as weaknesses, real emotion, persistence, and the desire to connect were what kept me standing here. I said that revenge through success did not mean demanding back what was lost, but proving through results that those underestimated can build something lasting. I said I didn't strive to be the most successful, only to keep the kindest part of the profession without paying with silence. At the end, the audience didn't erupt in applause, but their eyes looked at me in a way I had never seen before, not admiration, not pity, but understanding. That night, I walked back to the office, autumn wind gently blowing through the old brick buildings. I saw my shadow stretch along the pavement, neither too clear nor too bright, but truly there. Inside, no sense of victory, no gloating, just a very soft sigh, as if placing the last stone on a foundation I had spent years rebuilding. I knew I was not at the finish line, but I was back, and this time, I would be the one steering. There is a kind of silence that carries not endurance, but a unique strength. where you do not need to speak for others to understand that everything has changed. I felt this most clearly on the morning Echo officially signed its seed investment deal. As I walked into the meeting room of a sustainable development fund with a calm face, no longer forcing a smile to be accepted. They had watched the 3 latest campaigns I had launched, from a small bakery to a nonprofit education program, and they said what convinced them was not the reach or media metrics, but the rare trust they saw in every video between the content creator and the story subject. I did not celebrate. I did not cry. I simply stepped out of the meeting room, stood under the early winter sunlight, and felt my heart as still as a lake after rain. No need to prove anything anymore. The results had spoken for themselves. A month later, Reverie officially withdrew from 2 major campaigns after losing sponsorship. Darlene emailed some partners to clarify that the internal incident did not affect their professional commitments. But apologies in the media world carried no weight without action. Lorraine disappeared completely from public channels. Rumors said she moved out of the city, while others claimed she was trying to rebuild her name with a new project, but found no partners willing to join. I didn't follow those stories closely, not because I forgave, but because they no longer affected my path. I chose not to retaliate openly, not to confront publicly, not to expose anyone in the light. I simply chose to do better every day and let time handle the rest. Not everyone collapses with a loud bang. Some fade silently, as every turning back, every closing door, and every doubtful glance replaces admiration. Decline is sometimes not failure, but a void where no one believes anymore. Echo grew in ways I never imagined, not by speed, but by depth. Every campaign, every client came, not because I pitched hard, but because they were referred. I didn't need to exaggerate what I did. I only needed to tell what I truly believed, and that was what made them trust again. I remember the last time I returned to a networking meeting in the agency world, where people once shrugged at my name. Now they asked how I kept a loyal customer community without a huge budget. I didn't answer with tactics. I only said I always started with genuine respect for the client's story. That was all. But they were silent, not because they didn't understand, but because they realized they had long forgotten that. Rosa still occasionally sent me short messages, telling me about small brands she met, honest people who just didn't know how to tell their stories. Each time, I saved those messages and scheduled follow-ups, not for gain, but because I knew what it felt like to be forgotten. I knew what it was like to be pushed out of the main story, even though I wrote it. And I wanted Echo to be a place where no one falls out of the middle simply for not being flashy enough. I called it the silent part of the market, where if you have enough patience to listen, you will find countless real values waiting to be named. One late afternoon, I received a package with no sender name. Inside was a thick, color-printed dossier, the latest campaign Reverie launched under another agency's name. Perhaps they were trying to refresh everything by changing the cover. I flipped through a few pages and saw a description nearly verbatim from an idea I wrote 2 years ago. I simply closed it and put it in the drawer. I was no longer angry, no longer hurt, but I didn't forget, and I didn't need to act anymore. I knew if they still used my old ideas to survive, it meant only one thing: I had gone further than they thought. That night, I walked around the old neighborhood. The first apartment I lived in after leaving Reverie now had new tenants. Warm yellow light spilled from inside. Dishes clinked softly, and the smell of baked butter wafted through the window crack. I stood there a moment, not out of regret, but to look back on a road once so unstable. I thought of the first time I typed echo on a PowerPoint title slide. I thought of Victor, who silently returned my dropped keys. I thought of Darlene, who once sent me a congratulatory message for the kindness spirit. And I thought of myself in that old kitchen, late at night, dim light, fingers trembling as I typed the last words for a presentation no one recognized. That person was still me. But now, I was back, not as a winner, but as someone who no longer needed to win to exist fully. When I returned to the office, it was fully dark. On my desk was a small cactus pot sent by a client, with a card. Thank you for telling our story with kindness. I gently touched each sharp spine, feeling the life hidden beneath the rough exterior. Like me, once thinking I was just a background for others' spotlights. Now I understood I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed not to go out. Someone once asked if I would do things differently looking back. I just smiled. Some things don't need rewriting because they are not mistakes, but disguised beginnings, like how I was once erased from my own story, only to learn how to create a space where others would no longer have to go through that. And if you have ever been betrayed, stolen from, or pushed out of the game, I want you to know that revenge through success is not about others falling, but about standing up without needing them anymore.